All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. Thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're watching live or the recorded version of this morning's program. My name is Pat Cain, Public Programs and Visitor Services Coordinator here at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. And I want to thank you all so much for tuning in to another program in the short series of virtual programs we're doing last week, this week, as well as next week, leading up to the opening of our newest exhibit, A History of Healing Infectious Diseases and Community Responses to Defeat Them. These virtual programs are giving you a closer look or a sneak peek at some content, some artifacts, some things that you may see in this exhibit once it opens up later this month. The exhibit will focus on local and worldwide impacts of such diseases as the 1918 flu, smallpox, malaria, tuberculosis, polio, typhoid, cholera, HIV, AIDS, and of course, COVID-19 that we're still battling today. In addition to examining the impact disease has had on our health and well-being, the exhibit will highlight particular instances in the past as well as the present where local citizens came together during previous epidemics and pandemics for the betterment of their communities. Before we get into today's program, I just want to go over a few things before we get started. Let us know where you're watching from, where you're tuning in from when you're watching this program, whether it's live or recorded. Always love to see that, so jot that down in the comments section below. Also, should you have any questions, let us know what questions you may have by putting those down in the comments section. Address questions as best as we can, either throughout the program or at the end. Lastly, the next and last program in the series will occur next week on Wednesday, May 18th, where our curator, Mark Hansen, will provide a closer look at house calls. He'll discuss the whys and wherefores of house calls by doctors and other medical professionals earlier in our history, why they declined, and a recent resurgence of them here during the current COVID-19 pandemic. So tune in to see artifacts, images, and stories that will be part of the special exhibit opening very soon at the end of the month. You can learn more about Museum of the Grand Prairie and Champaign County Forest Preserve District by finding us on social media or visiting museumofthegrandprairie.org or ccfpd.org. All right, so again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop any questions that you may have down in the comment section below, but we're going to jump into today's program. Again, the focus of today's program is community responses. Throughout researching the exhibits committee, we noticed many ways in which international and national communities, as well as local communities, responded to previous epidemics and pandemics. And in uncovering that research, some of these responses are reminiscent of responses that we're seeing during the current COVID-19 pandemic. So today I'll be focusing on community responses to polio as well as HIV AIDS. My colleague Katie Snyder was supposed to join us today, but unfortunately she's unable to attend. But she did some really excellent research in terms of the HIV AIDS section of the exhibit that will be opening soon. So starting first with poliomyelitis, what you see on the screen here is a recreated graphic of what the disease looks like microscopically. The disease dates all the way back to ancient Egyptians, though not in large epidemic and pandemic forms, where we started to see it really kind of take hold with outbreaks in the United States during the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s. The virus itself infects the digestive system after folks consume food or water that may be contaminated with infected fecal matter. We see it spreading to different areas of the body, such as the spinal cord or the brain, causing severe illness, sometimes paralysis, and sometimes even death. With this disease that took a large hold over the United States as well as the world in the 20th century, we saw various responses to the disease. Notably, one individual that suffered from polio, former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, spent much of his life in a wheelchair due to the paralysis symptoms caused by the disease. And locally, in 1949, particularly hard year for polio here in Champaign County. Local girl, Gaynell Grubb, 8 years old, as reported here in a local newspaper in 1949, came down with the first polio case in July of 1949. Again, a pretty prolific year in terms of polio in Champaign County's history. That same month, John Francis Love, 19 years old, of Philo, became the 8th polio case here in Champaign County and was sadly the first Champaign County resident to die from the disease that year. These polio victims and many others from the county were initially treated locally, but since local hospitals at the time did not have adequate facilities to treat polio cases, patients were often transported across the state to Springfield or Peoria, sometimes for treatment. However, these Springfield and Peoria facilities quickly filled up in that 1949 outbreak of polio here in central Illinois, and community members saw a big need here in Champaign County for a local facility to treat polio. To fill this need, Burnham Hospital at one point in time in Champaign opened the county's first polio ward dedicated solely to treating the disease. The ward featured nurses who exclusively worked shifts solely in this area of the hospital, separate restroom facilities in this particular ward, and even the dishes that were used by patients were sterilized separately from other parts of the hospital. A second polio ward was established here in Champaign County at the then Champaign County Hospital, the site where the now closed Champaign County Nursing Home sits. And again, in order to combat this disease that took a pretty strong hold here in the late 1940s here in Champaign County, as well as many other parts of the country, we've seen responses in various ways. And some responses very reminiscent of ways to battle COVID-19 in our current pandemic. So this poster was put out in 1953 by the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which would eventually become the March of Dimes Foundation as well, and urging folks to not do certain things as precautions to polio. You know, don't mix with new groups. That's very reminiscent of things we've seen suggested to help avoid coming down with COVID-19. Don't get overtired. It was believed that, you know, try not to exert too much energy so your body can be prepared to fight polio if need be. Don't get chilled. Also, similar ideas there. And then also keep clean. See this cartoon character washing their hands. Hand washing, a big way to help stop spread germs of, you know, whether, you know, polio, COVID-19, or many other diseases and infections. Also saw, you know, these awareness campaigns for these responses spread in a number of different ways. This is an advertisement that was in a comic book in 1952. Advertisement, again, put out by the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, where, you know, special message here from Captain Marvel of Marvel Comics. You know, boys and girls, the polio season may be coming around again soon. If you want to keep us as strong and healthy as I am, be sure to follow these rules. And again, urging people to not get chilled, not get overtired, don't mix with new groups, and try to keep clean as best as you can to help stop the spread of polio. And another interesting way that various communities responded to polio was by using the insecticide DDT. It was believed that flies, mosquitoes, other small flying insects, at one point in time, it was believed that those insects carried the disease of polio. And how can we get rid of polio? Well, let's get rid of the disease with a prominent insecticide, DDT, at the time. This photo, I believe, is from the 1950s in San Antonio of a DDT fogger driving through the town on the back of this truck. Of course, that is not how the disease is spread. As I mentioned earlier, it's contaminated water or food that's been contaminated by infectious fecal matter that is believed to be the cause for polio spreading. But this was, at one point in time, what the thought was. You know, let's kill these insects using DDT, which was, of course, you know, banned, I believe, in the 1970s. This insecticide. So folks were using DDT to fight polio, whether by using a fogger throughout an entire town or city. Here's an image of a woman with her baby in the early 1950s using a DDT canister to create a DDT fog in the entire room of this baby's nursery, this room where they're sleeping. in order to fight polio. I believe the idea was help protect your children, like we see in this advertisement here, against disease-carrying insects. With this advertisement, promoting DDT-infused wallpaper that you could buy from this company, Trims. So this wallpaper had DDT in it, again, to help kill flies, mosquitoes, ants that were believed to carry the infectious disease of polio. And locally, we saw other instances of DDT being used to fight polio. Here's an image from the Rockford Public Library of a bomber, a large airplane covering the entire city, spraying it with DDT to help fight the disease of polio. And locally, in Mansfield, uncovered a newspaper article from a couple of local newspapers that describe the village of Mansfield on a particular date, I believe in either the late 1940s or early 1950s, when polio was being combated with DDT, and a plane sprayed the entire town. And then also village workers also, were spraying alleys and sidewalks, and used as a local instance to fight polio using DDT. Of course, not the way to help fight the disease, since it's not transmitted through those insects. Eventually, of course, polio vaccine was largely distributed. So, today we don't face the outbreaks that we once saw in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s here in the United States and worldwide, continuing to wane as well. In 1938, March of Dimes began raising money for polio research, and finally in 1955 is when Dr. Jonas Salk's polio vaccine was declared safe for wide distribution. And then by the year 1979, the United States was polio free. Many children, consuming these oral polio vaccines like we see here. And in 2018, there were only 33 polio cases in the entire world. So a successful vaccination campaign in order to fight one disease known as polio. And again, in children, these polio vaccines are 99% effective and have likely spared, according to research, 18 million people from suffering from polio and paralysis caused by polio. So those are some of the responses to polio, some that will be featured in the exhibit. Community responses to another disease, HIV AIDS, found some interesting sort of responses that are similar to other responses we see in the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, my colleague Katie Snyder did a bunch of excellent research on the HIV AIDS section of the exhibit that you can come out and see on May 21st, and wanted to share a few of those things that will be featured in that section of the exhibit. So AIDS was first reported widely in 1981, and it wasn't until September of 1982 that the Center for Disease Control here in the United States, the CDC, began to use the term AIDS for the first time. HIV is a virus, which is a small infectious agent that multiplies itself by taking control of cells inside a host. And then AIDS, on the other hand, is the syndrome, the disease of various symptoms that are usually caused by a single disease or virus, from HIV. And AIDS leaves one with a weakened immune system and allows for bacterial and viral infections to easily attack the body. And since AIDS leaves the body, pretty defenseless, opportunistic diseases such as, pneumonia or tuberculosis or many other infections lead to a great deal of suffering and, many times death for those suffering from HIV AIDS. With AIDS infections peaking in the 1980s and early 1990s, a large campaign took place to educate folks and make people more aware of the disease and ways to prevent it. On the left here is a poster, a flyer that was put out by the U.S. Surgeon General's office, the CDC, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, to educate folks to really understand the virus, because there was a large amount of misinformation and not so much understanding and awareness of HIV/AIDS when it first became very prevalent in the United States. So a large educational campaign took place to make people more aware. And we see this poster that was found in the Library of Congress, encouraging folks to, this poster showing, I have AIDS, please hug me, I can't make you sick. Just, again, trying to make people more aware of the disease, and various campaigns going to help educate folks on what exactly HIV/AIDS is and how it can be spread, and not the misinformation that was being put out, how it could be spread. One way that individuals responded to the disease, as well as spread awareness about it, much like we've seen in various other epidemics and pandemics, and even in current times, was through artistic expression. And one of the more notable forms of artistic expression related to AIDS was the creation of the National AIDS Memorial Quilt, which first was created in 1987. The AIDS Memorial Quilt is a response to many lives lost to AIDS. The quilt toured the country for years and steadily grew over time. Today, the quilt includes nearly 50,000 panels dedicated to over 110,000 people, and the quilt itself weighs 54 tons. The National AIDS Memorial in San Francisco, California, is the quilt's current caretaker, and the AIDS quilt remains the largest ongoing public arts project ever. So this form of artistic expression to help honor the lives of those lost to AIDS. Locally, you can actually go see right now dozens of panels that were made in the 1980s and the early 1990s by residents of Central Illinois, as they are on display at a current exhibit at a local museum with our friends at the Spurlock Museum of World Cultures on the University of Illinois campus. Go check out this exhibit, Sewn in Memory, where you can see dozens of these panels, again, originally made in the 80s and 90s, that are part of the National AIDS Memorial Quilt. Looks like the exhibit will be up until July 10th of this year, so only just a couple more months to get out and see this exhibit if you're local, to learn more about some of these panels that were created by local Central Illinois residents. And here's a few photos from the Spurlock Museum's website of the exhibit. A bunch of very beautiful panels memorializing victims of AIDS. So go check it out if you haven't done so already. Here's another photo as well. Locally, an organization known as the Greater Community AIDS Project, which was started in 1985 to serve the Champaign and Urbana, Illinois communities. This organization, seeks to share accurate information, provide support for those living with AIDS here in the Central Illinois community. And for about 2 decades, from 1993 to 2012, artists participated in Artists Against AIDS shows and donated 50% or more of their sales to support this local organization, GCAP's efforts. Another form of artistic expression to help raise awareness, to help, provide support for those living with AIDS. And the annual Artists Against AIDS series continues on December 1st, World AIDS Day. GCAP and a local artist release a new print for sale to remember the work done and the work that remains to help battle HIV/AIDS today. And this photo is of a vase created by John Miller, a renowned glass artist who was educated at the University of Illinois. The vase will be on display in our exhibit opening at the end of the month in the HIV/AIDS section. And Brad Hebel purchased this vase at an Artists Against AIDS show several years ago. So this is another form of artistic expression in response to AIDS, infectious disease that has affected not only the local community, but national and international community for several decades. And here in the current COVID-19 pandemic, there's, we've seen a wide variety of artistic expression in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Katie Snyder, my colleague, who not only worked on the HIV AIDS section of the upcoming exhibit, also worked on a couple great projects, local projects, including Art in a Time of Quarantine here, which was a collaborative initiative to gather art from local students, local youth in the midst of, when we were closed down, all of these places were closed down. We all were ordered to stay at home for many, many months. This was which eventually turned into a virtual art exhibition, invited K through 12 students throughout Champaign County to submit artwork in a time of quarantine. And it turned into a virtual art exhibition, which I'm going to drop a link to here in the chat box if you want to check it out. Really great virtual exhibition of artwork that you can check out. And this was a collaboration that Katie Snyder here at the Museum of the Grand Prairie collaborated with Chambana Moms, Cranard Art Museum, Coop Adventure Play, and the City of Urbana Arts and Culture Program on, as well as a number of local youth artists to create this wonderful virtual exhibition. Another project that Katie was involved with was Pandemics as a Portal to Change, which was, not only included a virtual community art exhibition, but many public community events around the artwork that was created. The project aimed to provide a number of exhibition opportunities for the artwork. It included digital or museum, in-person displays, dependent on submissions that took place. And there was a call for art, for not only visual art, but, poetry and music and, film and various other artistic expressions and performances, that were hopeful approaches to, hopefully, how can, these various pandemics that we're still currently facing lead us to some positive change. And it was open to creators throughout the local community and includes 79 works of art that were submitted by 52 different artists, ranging from middle school artists all the way through senior artists. And the art that was submitted, is focusing on a number of different topics from, mental health, climate change, racial injustices, and various different efforts of community building, not only locally, but nationally and around the world. And again, various pieces of artwork were submitted, such as paintings and sculptures and animations and poetry and various other things were submitted as a part of this particular project. And again, it included, 52 artists, as well as Museum of the Grand Prairie, the Cranard Art Museum, the Urbana Free Library, Urbana Arts and Culture Program, College of Fine and Applied Arts at the University of Illinois, the Urbana-Champaign Independent Media Center, and it was also supported in part by a grant from the Illinois Arts Council. And if you haven't had a chance to check out virtual exhibition of the artwork, again, I'm dropping a link to that here in the comment section. Check it out. But again, another response and, props to Katie and everyone else involved on the work on that particular project. And, an artistic response to a pandemic we've seen not only in current times, but also seen in various other points when we're dealing with big problems, in our community, such as epidemics and pandemics. So that's the end of today's program. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks to other folks here at the museum, Barb Garvey, our director, Mark Hansen, curator, and Katie Snyder for their work on this exhibit and curating and researching this wonderful exhibit that we're looking forward to unveiling here in just a couple weeks. So the exhibit again will open on Saturday, May 21st. So come and check it out in person. And then our final program in these closer look programs, final virtual program, again, will take place next week. We'll speak on the theme of house calls. So hope you can tune in for that program. So thank you all so much for tuning in today. And until next time, we'll see you then.